I'm here. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Ms. Greenwood. Okay, Mr. Kehoe, Mr. Green, welcome. I think we are set to call the meeting to order. Linda, would you please read any announcements and then do roll call?
Good morning, Mr. Knox. Yes, the meeting is being conducted as a virtual meeting, so I will do a roll call of the trustees to confirm attendance. Mr. Green?
Here.
Mr. Santos?
Present on a count of 4.
Thank you. Mr. Kehoe? Thank you. Ms. Greenwood?
I am here. Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Jones?
Here.
Good morning. Mr. Bernstein?
I'm present.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly? Mr. Kelly? Okay. Ms. Sanchez?
I'm here.
Thank you. And Chair Knox.
I'm here as well.
Okay. Staff participating in the meeting include the following: Chief Investment Officer John Grable, CEO Santos Grayman, Chief Counsel Steve Rice, Interim Chief Counsel Johanna Fontenot, Principal Investment Officers Jude Perez, Jim Rice, and Chris Wagner, Senior Staff Counsel Christine Roslin, Investment Officer Derek Kong and David Simpson, Interim Chief Financial Officer Ted Granger. Consultants participating in the meeting include Leo Festino, Stephen McCourt, Alina Wan, Tim Filla from the Makita Investment Group. We have James Wall, Steve Kennedy, and Mark White from Alborn. Jose Fernandez and Natalie Walker from the Stepstone Group, the private equity consultants. And we have Thomas Hester, Margaret Knight, Anya Ritchie, James Mena, Jeff Giller from the Stepstone Real Estate Consulting Group. And lastly, we have Patty Glazier and Michael Cypress from Glacier Whale. And one second, sorry. Trustees, if you have a comment or question on any item, please use the Zoom chat option to be placed in the queue, or you may contact me directly. At this time, we ask all meeting participants to mute their mics until you're ready to speak. And now we may proceed with the agenda.
Thank you very much, Linda. Item number 2, approval of minutes for the regular meeting of April 14th, 2021. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Linda, did you catch the move and second? And
Yes,
would you
Ms.
please call
Sanchez.
roll?
Yes, it was Ms. Sanchez who made the motion, and Mr. Green seconded.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Green?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
Aye.
Mr. Kehoe?
Aye.
Ms. Greenwood?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez?
Aye.
Chair Knox?
Aye.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Item 3, report on closed session items. That report has been published and is available on LACERA.com. Unless Ms. Fontenot, you have anything to add?
No, nothing to add. Thank you.
Great, I appreciate it. Moving on to item number 4, public comment. Linda did share one written public comment via email with trustees. I would ask you that you read that. And then we have several people that have requested to address us this morning. Linda, could you please call on those speakers, please?
Absolutely. We will start with caller number 1. One second. Okay, caller number 1, you have entered the boardroom. You may start, you may actually enter *6 to unmute yourself, and you may begin. Caller number, can you hear us?
Good morning. Good morning. Is this public comment?
Good morning. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Veronica Sante. I am with Downtown Crenshaw Rising, and I am asking the board to accept Downtown Crenshaw Rising's bid to purchase the Baldwin Hills Crenshaw Mall. We have been going through this for over a year now. We have raised over $28 million in less than 5 days to put the down payment down on this mall, and you guys are still refusing to accept our offer. We are the only group that has been diligently raising funds and expressing to this board on a consistent monthly basis that we are determined and we are qualified and we have the financing to take this deal. Our bid was more than the other people's bid, Asha Bashara, this current person, and everybody else, and you are refusing us. And what I would like this morning is an answer from the board as to why Downtown Crenshaw Rising's bid is not being taken seriously. We know what we need, the community. I'm speaking I'm speaking for myself as a community member. I'm speaking for myself I will be 61 years old in 29 days. I have been living in this community for 30 years. And I cannot afford to move. I do not want to move. And the displacement of myself and the many 67,000 plus residents in this community, where most of them are seniors as well, like myself, that are on fixed incomes, that cannot afford to move, nor do we want to. This is horrible what this board is attempting to do with this sale. The community has made our voices heard that we want to buy this mall. We have raised the funds and no one is taking us seriously. And these words that I'm speaking for myself. And I think this is just straight blatant systemic racism at its highest level, that you guys are not taking us seriously and refuse to accept our offer. No one else has come up with the money or the offer like we have, and you guys just don't want to. It appears that you don't want to deal with us or take us seriously in this fight that we want to buy this mall. We're not asking for a handout. We have raised the funds. And I give the rest of my time to the next caller that's online for this same reason.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Ms.
you for
Sanse. Appreciate your comments this morning. Linda, next speaker, please.
Okay. We will be moving in caller number 2 into the meeting. Caller number 2, you have entered the meeting.
Go ahead,
Caller-
speaker. We can hear you.
Hello?
Caller,
Yes, we
Caller
can hear
number
you,
two.
speaker.
Yes. Am I allowed to speak or I'm still in queue?
No, you're on right now. Please go ahead.
Oh, yes. Greetings and salutations and good morning to the board. My name is Michael Gwynn, and you may remember my name, but I'm a LACERA member at this time. Not quite retired, but I am a LACERA member. And so the issue of the downtown Crenshaw effort to purchase the mall, I'm not going to get into the meat of it too much, but I would like to continue to encourage the board to consider our bid, consider the effect of us being able to purchase the mall and doing some good in the Crenshaw community. Secondly, I'd like to create a scenario for the board in this respect. Every entity, organization, or nonprofit likes to create a positive image and PR. This will go a long way in terms of allowing those individuals who are members or non-members of LACERA to understand that it's about the community, it's about the respect for the community, and it's also about the individual members who live in the community. So with that said, I'd like to push forward with our effort to purchase the mall and help the board members to understand this will have an effect 10, 15, 20 years down the line when some of us may still be around, some of us may not be. So with that said, I'd like to just share that. I was out of town earlier this weekend, so I can't really bring it like I want to, but I did want to speak and give commentary to that effect. Allow downtown Crenshaw to buy the mall. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments, Mr. Grin. Next speaker, Linda.
Thank you. 1 second.
Terms of allowing those individuals who are members and non-members of LACERA to understand that it's about the community, it's about the respect for the community, and it's also.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Jan Williams. I'm a longtime resident of the Crenshaw district, and I am calling to urge you to influence, to award the sale of the mall to Downtown Crenshaw Rising. The person that DWS Dusha Bank is currently awarded the bid to, David Schwartzman with Heritage. They are very bad actors. He has a very bad history of doing like horrible evictions of people and all kind of illegal stuff. So LACERA, you as a board who have pension fund holders who reside in that community, I would expect that you guys would want to not do harm to the grandmas and families in the Crenshaw district who have invested into your pension fund. There are a lot of county employees who live in this neighborhood, and we want our next generation to also live and enjoy this neighborhood. David Schwartzman, just like the last person DWS awarded the mall to, has a history of wanting to extract and exploit the Black community. We want you to do everything you can to influence DWS to stop participating in anti-Black racism, accept our very strong and viable bid that we submitted to purchase our mall. This is an opportunity for you to participate in a historic efforts. You can go down in historic efforts to resist gentrification, resist the exploitation of Black people, resist against the historic harms that Black communities have faced, not just in LA County, but in this country. Do everything you can to stop the sale of the mall to this David Schwartzman. We cannot afford $900,000 condos in our neighborhood. And that's what he's done in Inglewood. We can't have that. We are doing everything we can to hold the line at King and Crenshaw and say this is where Black folks will historically stay in Los Angeles, in the Crenshaw district. So I again ask you to do everything you can to facilitate the sale of the Crenshaw Mall to Downtown Crenshaw Rising. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Williams. Next speaker, Linda.
Thank you.
Hello.
Caller, good morning. Caller number 4, you're in the meeting. You have 3 minutes to address the board.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Donald Byers. I'm a member of Downtown Crenshaw Rising. Like the previous few members, Michael, Veronica, and Jen have spoken. We've been in the bidding process with LACERA and a bunch of other local developers in an attempt to buy the Downtown Crenshaw Mall. We are increasingly frustrated by the lack of transparency and willingness to take our efforts seriously. But we wanted to bring up our efforts again. We've been doing this for the past year, since May 2020. We've gathered over 22,000 signatures. You raised over $30 million, and we just want our bid to be taken seriously because we're probably the most credible investor you'll ever get in regards to that property. So thank you again. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Appreciate your comments this morning, Mr. Byers. Next speaker, Linda.
Thank you. Caller number, yes, caller number 5, you're in the meeting.
Yes, okay. Do I speak now?
Yes, please, go ahead. We can hear you.
Yes, my name's Keely. I'm with Black Lives Matter of LA, and I'm calling once again on behalf of Downtown Crenshaw and Crenshaw Rising. We have demonstrated everything that can be done to get this mall. We've done everything asked of us and more. But the most important thing that we are the only community-based bidder that has come before you in all this time. We have a large membership, we have community participation, and we have a vision for what we want to see in our community. These other people, Schwartzman and Live Works and the rest, are not based in our community. They don't have the understanding. They don't have the history. Hello?
Everyone could
Hello?
please mute. I'm sorry, speaker. Just give us 1 second, Mr. Akili. If
Yes.
everyone could please mute. Thank you. I apologize. Please proceed, Mr. Akili.
Yes, well, as I was saying, we are based in this community. We have a vision for our community. We have support from our community. All these other bidders that have come before you don't have that history, that understanding of those relationships. We think for this time, for this period, and for this mall, we are the best people to have it, to develop it, and to advance it. That's why we call in regularly to get you to see, understand, and accept that, we are the best option for the Crenshaw Mall. I understand the reservations and the anti-blackness that has been shown. We have to deal with that and have had to deal with that throughout our history in this country. However, we can get past that if you look at the facts, if you look at the developers, if you look at the architects, if you look at the people who are involved, the resources we have, and the community support, you would see why downtown Crenshaw Rising is the best option for you all to make money and for the community to benefit from it. So, you've already given Schwartzman an extension. You don't have to give it again. You can sign a deal with, or at least accept our bid, and we can move forward. So you should support downtown Crenshaw Rising. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Akili. Linda, next speaker, please.
Thank you. We will call on caller number 6 and move them into the meeting. Caller number 6, you have entered the meeting.
Hello.
Good morning. You have entered the meeting and you may begin now.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Would you like to start?
Sure. Thank you. Hi, my name is Amber Height, and I'm a member of Downtown Crenshaw calling about the sale of the Baldwin Hills Plaza. As you already know, Downtown Crenshaw has put in the highest and best bid to purchase the mall. Also, as you already know, our plan is the most community-centered and the most culturally relevant. Also, our development team and development partners are the most experienced and committed among the other groups considered, including the Shady and Subpar group who was selected with the bid. Given the facts I just stated, which are some of the facts you already know about, I'm asking you to use your influence as board members to let the controlling parties know Downtown Crenshaw should be the purchasers of the mall. Anything else points to illegal, illogical, discriminatory, and unfair selection. Thank you.
Appreciate your comments this morning, Ms. Height. Next speaker, Linda.
Mr. Knox, we have one more speaker and we're going to move them into the meeting. That's the last speaker for the day. Caller number 8, you're ready to address the board. You have 3 minutes. Caller number 8, can you hear us? Good morning. Okay. Caller number 8, can you hear us? Mr. Knox, I'm not sure if they could hear us.
Let's give it a few more seconds. Good morning. Can you hear us on the line? Yeah, I would circle back, but you mentioned this is the last one in the queue, Linda.
Correct. Yes, they were in the queue, but we did not get an email from them to address the board, so we just brought them into the meeting just in case.
Sure, that's fine. Let's give it a couple more seconds. Good morning. Did
Okay.
you wish to address the board?
Please enter *6 to unmute yourself. Caller number 8, can you please enter *6 to unmute yourself? I think they're still muted.
Good morning. Just asking one last time if you could please press *6 to unmute yourself if you'd like to address the board.
They logged off.
Okay. Thank you very much, Linda. Thank you to all our speakers this morning for your comments. We are now moving on to item 5, our CEO report. Mr. Kryman.
Yes, good morning, Chair Knox, board members. Wanted to provide you with a brief update. My report is on file for your review, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions related to that report. But I did want to give you an update on our hiring efforts. I did want to mention that we did provide a conditional offer to the Deputy Chief Executive Officer position. And so that individual is going through the background check, and we're finalizing the terms of employment. We're hopeful to have that completed by the end of the week, and then negotiate a start date for that particular individual. And so we'll provide the board with additional information as soon as it's available, and we finalize all of the terms. So I also wanted to make sure that you're aware that the AEO position, that particular exam closed on May 14th. We're in the process of going through all of the applicants, and we're going to bring it down to a short list so that we can begin interviews very, very quickly. So that AEO position, as you know, is for administrative support part of the operation, and so we're looking forward to completing that recruitment as well. We also have interviewed a number of individuals for the budget officer position, and we have a tentative offer out to an individual. Those particular terms of employment are also being finalized, and we're hopeful that once they get through the background checks, that we'll be able to bring them on board as soon as possible. We also are taking aim at a lot of the vacant positions that we have, that we discussed a little bit about during the budget JOGC meeting. And so I did want to let you know that we are in the process of completing our recruitment for some promotional exams, as well as for recruitment for our senior retirement benefit specialists, or RBS 3 positions. There's one position for the senior quality auditor. And I'm happy to say that for the Board of Investments, I'm sorry, for the investment office, the financial analyst 3 position, we're starting to canvass for resumes for the risk and hedge fund position that's available. We also have some upcoming exams that I did approve. We should be open within the next week, the media artist and RBS 1 position, which are very, very important for continuing to provide a high level of service to our members. A senior disability retirement specialist is also on the books that will come online next week. And of course, a senior accountant position. We're also taking aim at the vacancies that we have in our IT section. So this week, I was in the office yesterday and signed off on several IT positions. The job bulletins have been completed. We're going out sometime in the next month or so on the data systems analyst 1 position, data systems analyst 2 position, a systems coordinator, processing assistant, a data processing assistant, and an IT specialist 1. So all of those exams will be going out very, very soon, within the next 30 days, I'm hopeful. And we also have an exam out for a staff counsel and a senior internal auditor. And so I want to thank Carly for all of her efforts and her staff. They've been very, very busy making sure that the job descriptions, job bulletins, and the exams are moving forward through the system. So the last item is the RFP that we had for our labor negotiations consultant. We had four firms that applied for consideration. And so I'm expecting a recommendation from my staff by the end of the week or first time, early part of next week. So with that, I'm more than happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kryman, and thank you, Dr. Antoya, and your staff for all the work in advance on those recruitments. That's a lot going on. I have Mr. Kelly, and then I have Mr. Santos in the queue.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you as well to Carly and her team. That's a lot of effort there, and I appreciate it. Santos, I'm interested in the business continuity planning and specifically whether or not there's ever been any consideration for ransomware, either in terms of, tabletop exercises. I think it's particularly prudent to have a little discussion about that given the recent events regarding ransomware. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We had our last tabletop exercise a couple of months ago, and it was centered around an active shooter event and a bombing. The next tabletop exercise is going to be held in October, and the cybersecurity incident is one of the scenarios that we're considering. I don't want to tell you that we're going to do it because I want to make sure that my staff is surprised when they go through the tabletop exercise. And so that is something that we definitely are going to put in the rotation in terms of making sure that we plan for it and we go through an exercise for that.
Okay, and I assume there's no board policy regarding ransomware at this point.
The board policy is to protect ourselves as much as we possibly can, but we do not have. I do not recall reading a specific board policy, but we do have insurance, and we take these things on a case-by-case basis. I think it would be premature to say that we would pay it or we're not going to pay it. It just kind of depends on the specific circumstances at the time. And so that's something that the board would definitely be involved in terms of how we resolve that particular issue. But
okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Santos.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Santos.
Just thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions, Mr. Kryman. One, a follow-up to Mr. Kelly's question or comment. I had requested in the past meeting that the Board of Investment get a presentation from IT regarding cybersecurity. And I would like to know when that's going to happen. I think the latest event, once again, proves that we need to be vigilant with regards to our cybersecurity. And so it will be ideal to have this board get a presentation and how we are protecting the work that the Board of Investment does. And the other question I have, or perhaps a request that Mr. Kryman work closely with Mr. Grable with regards to doing a compensation evaluation for the staff. I am concerned as the economy improves and everybody gets back to business, that's going to be a tremendous opportunity for the private sector to begin to solicit our staff. And some of them, if not all of them, are prime candidates for private industry who are able to perhaps double what we pay them. So it's something that we need to be proactive. I know Mr. Kelly asked for continuity plan, business continuity. I think that also includes making sure that we are ready to compete with the private sector.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, good morning to everyone. Just a question, Santos, as it relates to the cybersecurity question, and I apologize if I missed it in your report, but have we made progress towards the CTO role yet? Can you update us? Because I know that was kind of key to advancing some of the things you talked about on your 100-day report in terms of a more comprehensive look at infrastructure and technology and cloud and all that other stuff. Do you have an update for us potentially on that?
Yeah, we have completed an analysis in terms of what the job description is going to be for that particular position. We'd like to elevate that particular position to an executive level position. That's something that we're going to have to go through the budget process. We have to have some discussions with the OOC committee, for example. And then ultimately we have to get it ordinanced by the Board of Supervisors. And so that process is going to take a little time. I have directed my staff in the budget process at least to defer that particular decision until a mid-year budget adjustment, but I'm satisfied that in terms of our cybersecurity, that the development of the new Chief Information Security Office is helpful in protecting our members' personal information and securing our systems at this point in time. So we've dedicated, I think, 4 additional positions in addition to the Chief Information Security Officer. And so I'm satisfied with where we are in that particular area, although we're constantly vigilant about making sure that we try to stay one step ahead. I know that the OOC committee, we've had a number of closed sessions to talk about cybersecurity and talk about cloud capabilities and so on and so forth. And so Mr. Kehoe keeps us honest in terms of making sure that we're following all of the steps and making sure that we're not missing anything. And so we appreciate his input as well as the rest of the board members that are on the OOC committee. And so we have a series of workshops that we're going through to make sure that we're secure. But the CTO position is definitely something that is going to be important as we start transitioning into the new technologies that we need in order to become more efficient as an organization.
Yeah, I was hoping that person potentially might be a part of the strategic planning process, which I know is also an element of your report. And one additional question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. Also, as it related to, as I was reading the report last night, the part of the back to work plan, are there any incentives that you anticipate around vaccinations? I know some companies have gone through, some kind of carrot style incentives to try and induce more vaccination participation by employees. Do you anticipate, something like that happening in order to reach a threshold participation for those coming back to work or not?
We have not anticipated providing those sort of incentives. I think that as public servants, quite frankly, I think that should be motivation enough to get vaccinated, quite frankly. And we're in a government setting, and so providing those sort of incentives is a little difficult. But I think that if we can figure out how to get people, I don't know, a cup of coffee or something like that, Starbucks credit card or something like that, maybe it's something that we can consider. It just need to make sure that it's appropriate. I'm not sure what the county is doing. I don't think the county is providing any incentives, but we'll look into that.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Thank you, Mr. Kryman. Any other questions on the CEO report?
Yes.
Mr. Santos, please.
Yeah, I know. Are we providing 4 hours time off for people to get vaccinated? 1 and 2, I didn't hear your response with regards to making a future presentation to the Board of Investments regarding the cybersecurity, similar to the presentation that we got on the Board of Retirement. or more geared to investments. I'm really concerned about the kind of parties and third parties that we deal with on the Board of Investments and how we are working with those partners up there to make sure that we are protected.
Yeah, in terms of the cybersecurity, we will work with Mr. Grable and with Ted Granger in terms of looking at those third-party relationships. And we do plan on having a presentation on cybersecurity with the Board of Investments. It's a little different because it's really an analysis of our relationship with third parties and what sort of security measures they have in place, as opposed to us looking at our own systems and trying to figure out how secure we are in the cloud. So it's taking us a little longer to get prepared for that presentation, but we will definitely try to do it in July. If you can give me until July, we will have a presentation of some sort.
Absolutely, and I remember in 2008, one of the issues that we had, 2009, was with the security lending program. It was a little different, but still, I think with the cyber criminality going on around the world, I think it's something that we need to analyze and be vigilant in order to protect ourselves.
Yeah, we will have a closed session item on that. And with regard to your question about providing time off for individuals to get vaccinated, we do allow that for our LACERA members.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos, Mr. Kryman. Any other questions before we move on to item 6? Mr. Kelly?
Santos, do you have any idea yet what your vaccination rate is for the agency-wide?
I do not.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, we will move on to item 6, our Chief Investment Officer report, Mr. Grable.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. I'll begin twofold. First, thanking Amit for driving the slides today. I think Amit's very smart for volunteering when the board packet's 200 pages as opposed to some that have been 800 pages. But thank you, Amit. I'll start also by providing a little bit of an answer to Mr. Santos's question that he asked of Mr. Kryman, which is our investment diligence has really expanded over the last several years to place much more emphasis on operational due diligence. And part of operational due diligence covers things such as cyber systems of the partners, the intermediaries, the people that we work with. So we take it much more seriously, and it's a dedicated section of our recommendations, not just recommendations, but our ongoing diligence. So it is something that we're keenly focused on. So with Amit, if you could turn to slide 4, please. Thank you. This chart in many ways is a 100-year flood type of chart. Unfortunately, it's the same chart in many ways that we had last month. The 12-month returns for equities, as shown here, are extreme. Global equities up 48%, US equities up 51%, emerging markets in the bottom left is up 49%. The interesting thing about the emerging markets index is that inclusive of that 49% bump, the 10-year annualized number is only 3.6%. I think one of the things to note from these slides is that there's significant endpoint bias, given that these numbers are off depressed levels from earlier in the pandemic. Amit, if we could turn to slide 9, please. So as of the end of March, the pension was at $67.9 billion. Since that time, we've crossed 70 billion for the first time, which is a nice milestone for us. As of the end of March, the fund was up 2.6% net for the month, 4.2% for the quarter, and 18.4% fiscal year to date. those numbers are outstanding. Yet if we turn the page, OPEB is even better. The balance of OPEB was 2.1 billion. OPEB was up 21% fiscal year to date and 37.8% over the last 12 months. So when you look at these two plans, the pension is in the bottom quartile compared to peers for the 1 year period, and OPEB is in the top quartile. However, both are doing what they're supposed to do, and that both are, for the fiscal year to date and the 1 year period, they're both above their benchmark. And we'll have more details about both plans next month in the quarterly performance book. Just some perspective as it relates to the comparison between these two plans. First is asset allocation matters. OPEB is 50% public equity, whereas the pension is 35% target in public equity. And public equity over the 12 months ending in March was up about 60%. In contrast, the pension has about a 19% target to investment grade fixed income, and OPEB only has a 10% allocation. And investment grade fixed income was up about 1% over this 12-month period. So as it relates to asset allocation mattering, OPEB has dramatically more of what worked, and the pension has much more risk mitigation. But both those decisions were strategic ones made by the Board of Investments. It's important to note that OPEB is more volatile, and the realized volatility has been much higher. You know, it's evidenced if you look back 1 year ago, if we were to look at the 1 year returns for the period ending March 2020, the pension was down 2.8%, whereas OPEB was down 12.3%. So, you know, the asset allocations, you know, really do matter. Also, implementation matters. If we look at OPEB and its exposure to real estate, that exposure is expressed through REITs, which are publicly traded, do have a high correlation, a high beta as it relates to equity. Over the last 12 months, REITs were up 37%. As a result, REITs were the second highest contributor to the total returns for OPEB. In contrast, the pension invests real estate mostly through separate accounts, and those returns have been flat. Unfortunately, that's the only asset category for the pension that has had no contribution to returns over the last 12 months. Linda, at the beginning of the meeting, introduced our new consultants from Stepstone. Want to welcome them and just, you know, express to Stepstone as well as the real estate and real asset teams that you know, we have a lot of work in front of us, and you know, we will be presenting information to the board just to really focus on the implementation of the real estate program. Bearing in mind the importance of asset allocation, we do have a discussion later this morning about a recommendation for the strategic asset allocation for the pension, and next month for the OPEB trust. Slide 13, please. This is a new chart. There were questions by a trustee last month about our geographic exposure, so we added this chart. This chart shows our investments, our assets by country of domicile. You know, an example of this is Apple. Apple is classified in this chart as 100% US, even though 60% of its sales are non-US. But that's the convention that is used in our risk system. It's country or security of domicile. A couple other things to point out in this ROW, rest of world, that's the sum of countries that are below 50 basis points. Global, those are mandates for which we do not have line item transparency. So those are big numbers. And we're getting better and better with more and more mandates, the more that are on kind of our platform, are in separate accounts where we do have line item transparency. What's clear from this chart is that LACERA does have a home country bias, 72.3% of our assets. Global equity is more market neutral. The balance of the portfolio is less so, except for emerging market debt. The question that really motivated the this chart were some questions about LACERA's exposure to Chinese investments. What this chart shows is our direct exposure is 2.7%. Ultimately, it's a question for the Board of Investments whether we are, overweight. Just a couple of points on that are the weighting of the equity benchmark, the ACWI IMI, which is our benchmark. That weighting to China is 4.5%. Another point of reference just is China is the second largest economy in the world, and it contributes over about 16% or so of global GDP. Next slide. This slide shows the geographic exposure by asset category. The takeaway is, as I mentioned, growth has the most geographic diversification. The other takeaway from this chart is that the US exposure is the majority of every asset category. Turning to slide 15.
Mr. Grable, just real quickly before you move on, back on 13, when you reference the bias, is your sense that that's shared among other pension systems of our size?
We had this discussion with MSCI, that is our risk provider, and they said that many plans do. Ours may be a little more. And that's, I think that we've had some targets as it relates to real estate, for example, getting to 15% non-US. But we've also have a very large allocation compared to some plans, or a larger allocation compared to some plans for risk mitigation and investment grade fixed income. And that most plans express through more of a home country type of bias.
Thank you.
On slide 15, we spend much of our time, maybe most of our time, talking in percentage terms, percentage returns, as opposed to notional dollars or cash flows. And so I'll stop on this chart for a second. And this chart is very different than it was a year ago. If we were to look at the chart a year ago, the chart on the bottom with the three lines, fiscal year 19, 20, 21, if we were to sum up the number of months, and they sum up to 34 months, a year ago, those 34 months summed to positive $3 billion of change in fiduciary net position. This year, those same 34 months, so the same amount of time, sums to positive $11.2 billion. And maybe for further emphasis is the first 10 months of fiscal year 20, we had negative 1.9 billion as it relates to the change in fiduciary net position. Fiscal year 21, those first 10 months are positive $9.3 billion. It really is remarkable what's happened in the markets over the last year or so. Slide 21. And for the chart of the month, the motivation for this one, this is one that we constructed as opposed to finding one that we liked. And this was the genesis of this was an analysis in an article by Jason Zweig, the intelligent investor, in the Wall Street Journal about a month ago. So we put together a couple charts. What the chart on the top shows really is that ESG, environmental, social, governance factors, are a mega trend. I would put them up there over the course of my career, with the rise of index funds, the rise of alternatives, really as traditional as maybe the three biggest mega trends that I've seen. So the chart in the top shows the assets under management of signatories to the PRI. LACERA signed, we were an early adopter in 2008. Today, the AUM for signatories is about $120 trillion. That's massive. However, it's important to point out that LACERA, we view ESG or sustainability as a process as opposed to a product. And it's a critical process for us. It's something that we recognize in our statement of investment beliefs. Others may lack the governance that we have, or may lack dedicated staffing resources, And their only way to express ESG may not be as a process, because they may not have the resources to do that, but is more as a product. And that can be seen on the chart on the bottom right, that ESG products have had a meteoric rise over the last decade or so. And once again, the chart shows that the flows and the amounts. And that's not to say that many ESG products don't incorporate ESG as a process, but I think that LACERA's approach is more than a small feel-good allocation. Check the box, yeah, we have an ESG product, let's move on. It's something that we embrace across the portfolio with every single recommendation and every single existing mandate that we have. The next slide may show the intersection of two of the mega trends. First, the rise of ESG and the growth of passive equity mandates. The chart on the top shows that trillions with a T have gone from passive equity from active equity. And that can be seen in the LACERA portfolio. 60% of our portfolio is passively implemented, 20% is factor-based. So, how we implement is very similar to that mega trend. That has had a tremendous impact on money manager fees, which takes us down to the chart on the bottom. Mandates with high active fees have been replaced with index strategies that have fees that are approaching zero. The chart also shows that ESG product fees may be closer to active fees. And I think it's really important, and this is why I think our approach is better, of how we embrace ESG as a process and not a product, is many ESG strategies just kind of reshuffle Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, and whether they're 18 or 19% of the exposure of that strategy, there's a very high correlation to passive, yet the fee is much higher. So I think it's really important how that one is for those that do look at products, it's in many cases buyer beware, and it's incumbent upon you not to make sure that it's not just marketing, but I think it's critical for us. I think that we have really evolved as a result of having been a signatory to the PRI, longstanding member of CII and other associations of ESG as a critical process. We have a dedicated committee as well as a dedicated team. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grable. I don't have anybody in the queue, but certainly open it up for questions.
Just one
Mr.
comment,
Santos?
Mr. Chair, if I may. This is for new real estate consultant. Welcome on board. I'm looking forward to see how you help us improve the real estate portfolio. I have been very concerned regarding this particular portfolio for many, many, many years. So looking forward to you coming on board and working with the staff to improve our real estate portfolio. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Not seeing anybody else. Thank you, Mr. Grable. We will move on to item 7, non-consent items. We have a recommendation by Mr. Grable. The board approved the strategic asset allocation option B of Makita's presentation, and it notes which pages those are on. Mr. Grable, did you want to kick things off before we hear from Makita?
Please, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
So in your packet, for the pension trust, there is a strategic asset allocation recommendation from staff. Option B, as the chair noted, and there's a recommendation deck from Makita. Before the Makita team goes through their slides, I'd like to set the stage. I think it's important to point out that this has been a deliberative process. Over the last 11 months, the board has discussed strategic asset allocation every month. There's been a presentation from Makita and staff and board discussion. Topics have included low interest rate environment, the board's risk tolerances, capital market assumptions, and a review of our asset category structure. This is also the first strategic asset allocation study that has incorporated climate analysis. I think that we're probably ahead of the pack as it relates to that. As the staff memo points out, there's no precisely right decision for the Board of Investments. Capital markets are uncertain, yet the recommendation is based on Board of Investments feedback. All the portfolios, including option B, are in the neighborhood of portfolio D that was flagged last month. Each portfolio has advantages as well as less attractive aspects. We believe that all portfolios can be implemented, some easier than others and not on day one, but we'll give monthly updates as to the progress of implementation. It's also a benefit of the functional framework that the board adopted 3 years ago, because at the functional level, we can be in range very quickly. All the portfolios on paper, recognizing that this is a model and models are precisely right or precisely wrong, may be more optimal than our current allocation. They show higher expected return and better risk compensation. However, all portfolios do have more risk than our current allocation, and that's really predicated on achieving our 7% target. The higher risk is in terms of volatility, illiquidity, as well as operational complexity. And with respect to these risks, I would not make a recommendation if we were not positioned to manage them. I believe that we're better prepared than we were at the time of the last strategic asset allocation. We're more fully staffed going into this strategic asset allocation. We have cross-functional teams. We have more dedicated asset teams. For example, we have a dedicated real assets team, as well as a dedicated credit team. And those were new discrete asset categories in 2021. And we only augmented those teams post the Board of Investments adoption of those asset categories. And human capital is critical to this strategic asset allocation, as well as everything that we do. We have better technology. The Board of Investments has made investments in risk management platforms, ESG analytics, in a liquid administrative service provider, dedicated managed accounts, performance reporting, appraisal services. These are all critical to the recommended portfolios. We've re-onboarded State Street. As a result, we have better oversight of the portfolio. We have daily NAV. We did not have that 3 years ago. Notwithstanding this, we will have an RFP as it's coming up on a decade with State Street. So that's something that we will bring forward later this year. We also, this go around, have a strategic mantra of allocator to investor. All the scenarios that Makita will present require us to continue on the path and that continuum towards investor. And this goes back to a comment that was made, or several questions that were made of Mr. Kryman about business continuity. We have been through a real business continuity event. As a result, our diligence is better than ever. We have more people involved or more collaborative across groups. There's greater consistency. Our modules do include ODD. That's critical to the cyber discussion, includes ESG, DEI, as well as our traditional IDD. These portfolios also, because they do have a higher degree of illiquidity, require us to manage cash better. We do that. We have daily tracking of inflows and outflows. We have a cash overlay, which was not in place at the time of the last strategic asset allocation. So with that, I will hand it over to Makita to walk through the slides.
Thank you, Mr. Prevail, and good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. So we are in a position today where you may choose to act and make a change to the strategic asset allocation. As Mr. Prevail indicated, this is something that we've been working towards since sometime last year with multiple meetings. You will recall as well that at the last meeting, we presented sample mixes to essentially help you find the desired neighborhood. And with that feedback from the last meeting, today we're looking to find the desired house in that neighborhood. So the next slide shows the items we plan to cover in the presentation today. I will get us started, and then my colleagues, Alina and Steve, will essentially address a variety of analysis to help you compare and contrast the different mixes. And by the way, we went over with your staff looking at literally thousands in models, but more realistically, dozens that we discuss back and forth. So with that, if we move to the next slide, as we've alluded to in past meetings and Mr. Gribble mentioned today, this is the most impactful decision that you as a group of trustees can make. As he states in the investment belief, this is the primary determinant of the risk and return outcomes of the fund. On the next slide, on the slide number 4, we look at the mixes that you have in front of you today. The first two should be quite common. One is the current policy from the last asset allocation study. AA represents the actual allocation as of year-end 2020. And then you have 5 policies or mixes. Policy D is the exact replica of policy D from the last meeting, also known as a desired neighborhood. For alternatives that we think improve even on portfolio D are A, B, C, and E, and we nickname those higher liquidity. So mix A out of these options is the one with the higher liquidity. Mix B is the one that staff has recommended in their memo and today verbally. It essentially sought to optimize policy D while balancing implementation considerations. Policy C is more focused on the barbell approach. You will recall that a couple of meetings ago, we went over trying to optimize that, essentially having very strong defense and then very strong offense. So that one is the one that has the highest allocation to long duration treasuries. And policy E is similar to policy D in that it tries to maximize the high Sharpe ratio. In other words, the return per every risk that you take. So in slide 5, these should be familiar. This is the same slide that we looked at the last meeting. And so the focus group is essentially that desired neighborhood. And within it, you'll see on the next slide, slide number 6, the 5 mixes that I just went over. A higher liquidity, the recommendation, the more of a barbell approach, the policy B from the last meeting, and the one with the higher Sharpe ratio. Some things would stick out. Number 1 is a reduction in risk reduction and mitigation, given the reality of where we're living in today's low rate environment, and a commensurate increase to growth. And in the next slide, we will see how those break out. But if we stay on 6, sorry for few more comments. You'll see credit also slightly decreasing in most of these categories, and real assets and inflation hedges staying on par or maybe increasing. So there are some changes to the main 4 buckets, if you will, but not drastically. But within it, there's more. For example, within risk reduction, you will see that the allocation to investment grade bonds will decrease, but there is a commensurate increase, or at least a partially offsetting increase in treasuries as well as in hedge funds. I will also point that towards the bottom of this table. We highlight the allocation to illiquid assets, both very illiquid like private equity and somewhat illiquid like core real estate funds or other investments that might have quarterly liquidity, but that could put some gates at different times. So you see, generally speaking, a move towards higher allocations there. And as Mr. Grable alluded, there was heavy consideration given to managing those risks and making sure that they're actually implementable within reasonable timeframes. Slide number 7, thank you, goes into more detail into each of these mixes. Starting from the top, you will see that the allocations to listed equities or global equities stays the same or actually decreases to some degree. So by and large, it's not a big change. Where you see increases is on the liquid piece within growth. So private equity, about 13% today, but it goes from 14 to 18% on these different mixes. And then non-core private real estate increases from about 3% to about 5%. And I would also remind you that there was a decision earlier to move value add from real assets into growth category. On credit, you'll see the main change includes higher allocation to liquid credit in terms of the liquid credit piece, and you'll see a consolidation of the liquid piece, much like we have within global equities. Within real assets, you see largely in the various mixes increases to infrastructure and PIPs, and they are again fairly minor. And within risk reduction and mitigation, the biggest change from the past go around about 3 years ago is the inclusion of the long duration government bonds, which range anywhere from 5 to 7%. You see also marginal increases in hedge funds, which again, over a couple of years, it's very feasible for staff to get you to that allocation. You'll see also the fifth bucket with overlays and hedges, which of course have a target of 0, but may have holdings here and there. And then the bottom is essentially the same that was shown in the prior page. In yellow, we highlight the outputs based upon the optimizer. All of these are in the neighborhood of the 7% return assumption with expected volatilities that are fairly narrowly distributed. So when you put those together, you arrive at the Sharpe ratio, and you see, marginal differences. Again, you need to also remember that there is a degree of false precision within these models, and so at least in our mind, these differences are very subtle, and we can spend more time going over those. I think it's going to be very insightful to also see the analysis from multiple lenses, looking at from the mean variance analysis to a scenario to shock analysis to including climate change, liquidity. So I think those will provide also very good insights to you. We will wrap up then this presentation with additional thoughts on these mixes. And of course, we can entertain questions from you as we move along. But if there is no questions at this moment, I will invite my colleague team to take us over the first analysis, which essentially incorporate your liability.
I don't have anybody in the queue, so please proceed.
Okay, thank you very much, Leo, Mr. Chair, and members of the board. The key consideration on the next slides is really to recall that we're focusing on a fairly narrow part of the efficient frontier and the overall models that we constructed. Again, you all saw various different options with much wider risk and return characteristics at the last meeting, and provided direction to focus in the neighborhood of D. So everything that we're going to be looking at is very closely situated to that, and each one of them has minor differences. So when we're looking at these zoomed in screens, it may seem like the departure from B to A may be quite large, but we might only be talking about tenths of percentage points. And as to Leo's earlier point, may well be within the sort of false precision of the model. So these slides that we're going to tackle right now, this is based off of the survey work that we did a few meetings ago, where we highlighted some issues that came through, concerns beyond just maximizing the level of return for risks. So here we're looking at some additional dimensions. This first slide is looking at long-term funded status and also short-term funded status. And really what we're trying to do, optimal, is maximizing across each of these two dimensions. So you can see there are some differences in the portfolios. And again, here, I think you can get the context of how zoomed in we are. In this particular slide, you can't even see where the current allocation is or the current policy, because in those scenarios, they're so far below on what the long-term funded status would be. So those don't even appear. Again, fairly tight. But this is one characteristic where you can see A performs a little less favorably. Again, it doesn't have the benefit of some of the other private market asset categories with slightly stronger returns. So relative to the risk you're taking in that portfolio, it doesn't maintain funded status quite as well. Moving on to 10. Here we're looking at the frequency and severity of drawdowns. This was something that also came through in the survey work. So as opposed to maximizing, in this particular case, we're looking to minimize those two variables. So a frequency of a 10% drawdown, and then also looking at the severity of any sort of drawdown. And here you can actually see the actual allocation does pop onto the screen here. It may appear to be more optimal in this one singular chart that we're looking at, but keep in mind when analyzing this one, it doesn't actually take into account your success at achieving your long-term returns. This is only looking really across the risk dimensions. So because of the low rate environment, most investors are being pushed a little further out the risk curve to meet their long-term return requirements. And here you can see D probably is the least optimal. So again, this really shows that we've looked to enhance what we presented previously based on feedback, and then also the work that we've been conducting with staff. So I would say that on this, all of the others look like enhancements to old portfolio D that we saw last month. Next chart. In this particular case, we're looking at deviations away from the funded status path. Obviously, the long-term goal is to meet your projected benefits. So that's achieving a fully funded status and being able to meet those long-term obligations. In this particular case, this is another optimization exercise where we're looking to minimize the frequency that you're away from that funded status path that's currently projected, and then also the magnitude of the distance away from that pathway that you might travel. Here again, this is only the portfolios in the neighborhood of D because the current allocation wouldn't get onto this grid. And I would say, you know, it seems like D, B, C, and E are all in relatively similar neighborhoods. D may look a little bit further away, but we're talking about less than 0.2% distance between D and, let's say, C in this particular chart. So again, this is a very, very focused area that we're concentrating on. For the next one, here we're going to get into some of the mean variance optimization characteristics. Again, because we've zoomed in already on a predetermined neighborhood, you're not going to notice a lot of variability here in the alternative portfolios A, B, C, D, and E. Where you will notice the majority of the changes, and they can be somewhat large, is from the current portfolio and the asset allocation. So the worst case returns do appear to be somewhat more severe in the alternative portfolios, but that's just the unfortunate consequence of the need to meet the 7.0 expected return target. We can go to the next one. We can look at it through that lens of the probability of achieving the 7% return target. And you can see portfolios A, B, C, D, and E all have fairly high probabilities, right around 50% or greater in most of the time periods, improving through to the 20-year when compared especially to the current portfolio and the actual allocation, where you have probabilities of achieving somewhere around 40%. So you pick up quite a bit of predicted ability to meet that long-term return objective. So with that, maybe I'll pause and see if there are any questions at this point before handing it over to Alina to get into even more granular information.
I don't have anybody in the chat box. Is there a question from a trustee before we move on? Okay, please proceed.
Right. Thank you. Over to you, Alina.
Thanks, Tim. I'll cover a bit more about risk allocation as well as stress testing and historical scenarios later on. Here we're looking at assessing the different components of risk budgeting, which can help investors in understanding how the aggregate risk of the portfolio is being added up by different asset classes. So the capital allocations of growth, which are represented by your left-hand bars, typically contribute to more risk than what their weighting implies, which is indicated by the larger accompanying right-hand blue bars of each pair. Relatively speaking, when we look at these policies, they look pretty similar when comparing the risk allocations, and that's not too surprising, just given that especially in the new suite of A through E policies, there are really only minor adjustments to each of the asset classes. Next slide. Now we're taking a look at absolute contribution of risk. So this is a slightly different view of the risk budgeting analysis. On the previous slide, we were comparing the allocations, the capital allocations, but now we're taking a look at the breakdown of each of the policies' respective standard deviation allocation as measured on the y-axis. And again, the different breakdowns of allocations between the functional categories, when you're taking a look at each of the different orange, pink, green, and blue categories, they tend to be pretty similar in proportion, but we can see that increase in volatility as we're moving further away from the current policy, just given by the height of these bars becoming a little taller. Next slide, please. Now we'll get into some an additional risk analysis, the value at risk, or VAR. Value at risk uses your typical mean variance optimization analytics to measure the potential worst case outcomes in percentage terms, as well as in dollar value. And we can see here that the current policy provides the greatest downside protection. I'll focus on the 6 months percentage scenarios. As a worst case scenario, the current policy can lose up to 15.7% in 6 months. And that's, that does better when you're comparing to a more extreme policy on D, which exhibits negative 17.9% loss in 6 months. And that greater downside protection from the current policy is again representative of both that lower level of risk and return. But overall, I would say in the new suite of A through E portfolios, they exhibit relatively similar value at risk measures. Next slide. And the next few slides, we'll be talking about historical scenarios. And this page shows the behavior of policy portfolios throughout historical events, provides us a bit more of a robust view of analytics over just MBO analytics. And here what we're showing is the historical performance of negative scenarios. And in general, I'd say throughout, we can see that the currency and interest rates moves have smaller effects on the overall total portfolios than your equity moves. And I'll focus on the top row, which is our most recently added shock scenario, the COVID-19 shock through February 2020 and March of 2020. The current policy and the asset allocations here fare, the current policy and the actual allocations here fare a little bit worse, returning negative 16.1% and negative 16.9% respectively. And so we do see a little bit more resilience across the other suite of policies. Next slide. So having taken a look at the negative historical scenario analysis, now let's take a look at the positive scenarios. Here we're showing some of the larger recoveries through the GFC and the top line and the recovery from the 2000.com crash. In general, we do tend to see that over periods of strong historically positive scenarios, your public market assets tend to have stronger performance than those of private market classes. And we can see that is the case here as well. Just taking a look at the actual asset allocation and mix A, both of those are faring pretty well because they have the higher allocations to global equity, 38%, which is larger than their neighbors in the chart. And they tend to capture the upside better. Next slide, thank you. Back one slide, please, to the impact of negative market movements. Perfect. So now the next two slides will focus on taking a look at stress testing. So we looked at historical market events, but now we want to focus on what happens if we change a specific factor of risk impacting long-term investors. And here we're taking a look at rising interest rates, credit shocks, US dollar strengthening, as well as equity market crashes. And when we compare the suite of additional policies, B and E tend to offer, both policies B and E tend to offer some more resilience in terms of performance. And the current policy does do well in these scenarios as well, but that again is just a little bit more expected just given the overall lower volatility and standard deviation of the portfolio. However, of course, the current policy still does pose that greater risk of not achieving that assumed rate of return. Next slide. And finally, we wanted to show stress testing through positive market movements to get a sense of how each of the policies might perform. Here, the portfolios A through E do capture more of the positive performance than the current policy, and all policies A through E provide higher expected returns in rising equity scenarios, which you can see on the two scenarios, equities rising both 10% and 30% below. And here, I think I'll pause for questions before we continue on with some of the shock scenarios through climate.
Thank you. I again have no one in the queue, but I'll pause as well just to see if anybody wants to chime in. No? Okay, go ahead.
Great, I'll hand it off to Steve.
Great, thanks, Alina. And I'll start on page 24. I'm going to cover analysis that Makita conducted with respect to climate scenarios and liquidity, and then conclude our presentation after that. Page 24 shows the impact on expected returns of each of the policy portfolios based on various assumptions made with respect to climate change in the future. This data is based off a climate model that Makita has built over the last several years. And to state what I hope would be obvious, all models have a degree of lack of precision to them. Climate change is particularly challenging to model because it is a relatively new phenomenon in the context of longer-term capital market returns. But with that, there are some interesting takeaways we have from viewing asset allocation with the climate lens. Let me first orient you to the 5 scenarios you see on this page under expected return. The 3-degree scenario is a scenario where the Earth warms by 3 degrees centigrade by 2100. That is a somewhat higher warming scenario than arguably what the capital markets are pricing in today. And with a warmer than expected climate, there are certain physical risks that are likely to impact businesses over that time period. A 1.5-degree increase by 2100 is actually a lower amount of warming than the capital markets are arguably predicting. And the assumption here is that in order to attain that lower amount of warming, there will be regulations and behavioral changes that have an impact on businesses along the way. We then have 3 other scenarios which in different ways tease out the various effects from the broader models. One is a policy change scenario, which evaluates the impact if the world were to adopt a carbon tax that would impact businesses. The 4th scenario, the technology scenario, would involve regulation that would mandate a quicker than commercially warranted shift from carbon intensive energy generation to less carbon intensive energy generation. And then the combined scenario is the policy and the technology scenarios put together. So there's a lot there and a lot of numbers there. I'm going to summarize them by saying that in the aggregate, all of these climate scenarios represent departures from the status quo. And any departure from the status quo with respect to climate, based on our model, has the potential to reduce the expected return for investors, largely because philosophically, companies, governments, et cetera, plan for the status quo. And so if there's not the status quo, there's a risk there that needs to be recognized. The second thing I'll highlight is that the variation between policy options A and E on the impact from climate change is very, very small and arguably within the confines of false precision within the model. There is a significant difference between the current portfolio and current policy and each of these options, which boils down to the fact that all else equal, portfolios that take on more investment risk will have a higher impact from climate change, because climate change tends to affect riskier assets. Put another way, the assets that are most protected from the uncertainties of climate change are treasury bonds and cash and investment grade bonds. As you move to asset allocations that have fewer of those assets and more assets that are at risk in businesses, those assets become more at risk due to climate change as well. And so the final thing I'm going to mention on this slide is, while arguably the expected return figures in this case are not all that helpful in selecting options A through E, the model itself is extraordinarily helpful in the next step after the asset allocation, which is designing how best to invest each of the asset classes in a climate uncertain future. And I'll get to that in a moment. If we flip to page 25. I just wanted to highlight here as well that climate change not only affects return, it also affects volatility and volatility as a proxy for uncertainty. Again, similar commentary here. The volatility associated with climate change increases from the current policy to each of the alternative policies because uncertainty is greater with riskier assets. I'm now going to turn to slide 27. And you've seen these tables from us before. And there's several of them in here. I'm only going to go through here to drive home a point on the models. And I'll draw your attention, if you put on your readers and lean close to your screen and look about 5 and 6 bars over from the left to the commodity and commodity shocked scenarios. These Whisker charts represent distributions of possible returns from high to low based on the climate scenario, which in this case is a 1.5 degree scenario. The most important factor to highlight for commodities, which I think is quite intuitive, is that the size of the Whisker chart, meaning the width of the distribution of potential returns from commodities, is much wider in a world where the climate changes. And so if you squint really hard, you can see the expected return for commodities also goes down, which is a reasonable assumption as well. But from an allocation perspective, what's more important is that the potential outcomes widen quite a bit. So it becomes a more challenging area to model and predict. If you shift over towards the middle of the chart, there's global equity and global equity shocked scenarios, which have a very similar pattern, not quite as severe as commodities, but still largely impacted by the climate change. And then more towards the right, you can see 2 bars, investment grade bonds and investment grade bonds shocked, where the impact of climate change is shown as much less. So we highlight this because as we look at working with staff on specific strategies and implementation tools within the asset classes that you select, this and other climate change analysis can be quite helpful in ever evolving the portfolio to be more consistent with the climate change risks that are present today. So with that, I will flip forward now to slide 35 and just talk a bit about liquidity. John highlighted this in his introduction. I'll emphasize the point. At the last meeting, when the board was selecting the right neighborhood, we highlighted that regardless of what specific policy you may adopt today, the most significant changes to this asset allocation vis-a-vis the status quo are, number one, the introduction and adoption of longer duration treasury bonds as a way to mitigate short-term equity risk, which makes the portfolio somewhat more efficient, but also a pretty meaningfully higher level of private market assets, which tend to be more efficient from a mean variance standpoint. The adoption of higher levels of illiquid private market assets in our eyes requires that liquidity stress tests be done to ensure that you're not putting yourself at risk of having to sell at a discount in the future illiquid assets based on what would be perceived as normal levels of market volatility. So this slide just shows one small slice of a much broader liquidity analysis that we conducted. It's the most illiquid strategy, policy E, and it highlights over a 5-year period where the capital markets have in years 1, 2, and 3 the same bear market experience as they had during the global financial crisis in 2008 and 9. But instead of recovering, the market is just flat after that. In the meantime, LACERA has to pay benefits in excess of contributions coming in. LACERA has to rebalance its asset allocation and manage the portfolio. This output of this model simply tells you that, based on this time frame, we don't see, if there were a repeat of the global financial crisis, any significant risk of having to dip into your illiquid assets to support normal cash requirements of the plan. So I wanted to highlight that as part of this overall process. So with that, let me move on to slide 37, and we'll finish up here. It's the same table that Leo showed before with the specific options. Again, just to reorient you, the two columns on the data columns on the far left are the current policy and the actual allocation today. A through E represent the alternatives that we're presenting today. I think staff did a really nice job in their memo to the board explaining their rationale for arriving at B, which from our perspective largely boils down to implementation realities. And I would highlight for the board that that is a meaningful consideration, particularly in certain areas like private equity, where these it's going to take a number of years to get the allocations up to target. And by the time they do, you'll be doing yet again the next asset allocation review. So I would conclude with just reminding the board that in many ways, asset allocation is a journey, not a destination. And so to us, what's important here is the directionality of that change. And we would, after the board makes its decision, we'd work with staff to develop a implementation plan over time for these, for whatever asset allocation policy the board adopts. So with that, I'll conclude, Mr. Chair, and we're open for questions that anyone might have.
Appreciate it, Mr. McCord and the rest of Team Makita. I do not have anybody in the queue. Certainly happy to entertain a motion and any questions.
Yes.
I'll be happy to make the
thank you.
motion.
Motion
Yes.
by Ms. Sanchez,
I second that.
second by Mr. Santos.
I have a brief comment if I may.
Please.
Thank you, Makita team, for the presentation. Really appreciate all that. I move that we adopt option B as the most reasonable strategy. And thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Just to clarify, Ms.
To
Sanchez.
clarify, I was moving the staff recommendation, which is option B.
Perfect. So I think we are in alignment there. Are there any other questions or comments? Mr. Kelly, please. You're muted.
Wanted to thank the team for their work and also Makita for their modeling, which was really impressive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Anyone else before we call roll? Okay, Linda, please call the roll.
Mr. Green?
Aye.
Mr. Santos?
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe?
Nice work by all. An aye for me.
Thank you. Ms. Greenwood?
Yes.
Mr. Jones?
Aye.
Mr. Bernstein?
Aye.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Sanchez?
Yeah.
You were muted, Ms. Sanchez.
Yes.
Chair Knox?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you very much. I think we'll take a break for 10 minutes here, so we'll be back at 10:53. Folks turn on their cameras. That way we can see that we have our quorum back. Thank you, Mr. Green, Mr. Jones, Mr. Bernstein, Mr. Kelly.
I'm here.
Perfect, Ms. Greenwood. Thank you very much. We are now moving forward with the agenda under reports, legal transactions, a year-end report. This is a new report, and to walk us through that, we have Ms. Rosalind, Senior Staff Counsel.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and trustees. Before I begin, I just wanted to note I've been having connectivity issues this morning. So if my image disappears, I've dialed in. So hopefully you still hear my voice, and hopefully that, it won't happen. But I just wanted to note that before I begin. And with that, I'll start. Today, we're presenting the legal transaction team's inaugural report on the work that we accomplished in 2020. Instead of walking through the numbers and charts in the report or presenting slides, I'd like to offer some context to the report by focusing on team composition, the work that's reflected in the report, and the trends we're seeing based on the data laid out in the report. So first, the team is composed of 3 attorneys, 2 paralegals, and 2 management secretaries. The 3 attorneys are John Harrington, who handles vendor agreements, non-disclosure agreements, and Public Record Act responses. Sue Clark, who handles alternative investments such as private equity and hedge funds, and myself. I oversee the team and handle public markets, real assets, and real estate investments. The 2 paralegals are Margot McCabe and Lisa Garcia. They assist with title holding company maintenance for the separate account real estate program, real estate transactions, subscription documentation, tax forms, country registrations, Form 700s, and notarizations. And finally, the 2 management secretaries are Teresa Martinez and Irene Ballestero. They handle signature gathering, invoices, filing, mail, calendaring, data entry, and other administrative services. These individuals work extremely hard every day, sometimes even after hours, to meet deadlines and closings. They're very dedicated, diligent, and mindful of LACERA's mission to deliver the promised benefit. Without them, we couldn't have accomplished as much as we did last year. So a big thanks and kudos to them for their efforts and dedication. The work that's presented in this report is reflective of the transactions that the legal office completes once an investment has been identified for board or staff approval. The easiest way to think of these transactions is to think of it as a life cycle, starting with RFPs, due diligence, and board or staff approval, followed by a period of active investment, and finally, the end or termination of those investments or manager relationships. At the start of an investment, we may review the RFP for a specific mandate, negotiate a non-disclosure agreement for access to due diligence materials, or once the investment is identified for board or staff approval, draft and negotiate the applicable agreements, investment guidelines, fees, side letters, and ancillary documents. Once the agreements are signed and managers are onboarded, the active investment period begins. It's during this period that we process various documents such as guideline or fee amendments, consent to extend the term of a limited partnership agreement, changes to the authorized signatory list, and PATCA questionnaire. Finally, when the board decides to end an investment or relationship, we draft termination letters, transition agreements, or negotiate sales. In addition to specific investment transactions, we also review RFPs before they are posted, respond to Public Records Act requests, maintain title holding companies, draft policies, advise staff on various legal issues, and review and negotiate vendor agreements for all the other LACERA divisions, such as admin services, systems, internal audit, and HR. Throughout these negotiations and processes, we work very closely with investment staff. We seek to understand their needs and requirements and the business terms that they want to incorporate into the agreements. In fact, we frequently attend their due diligence and team meetings. We also collaborate on policies and initiatives such as the procurement policy and TIDE and legal structures. Our goal is to strike a balance between doing the deal and negotiating the terms necessary to protect LACERA and comply with our own regulatory requirements. Turning back to the report itself, we believe that it illustrates several trends. First, I would note that the workload is increasing in terms of both the number of transactions and value of contracts. There are several reasons for this. First, the LACERA pension fund is growing from $47 billion in 2016 to over $65 billion by the end of 2020. Second, investments are becoming more complex and sophisticated. We now have a co-investment program, a hedge fund program, and a real assets program, none of which existed a few years ago. Some of these investments are much more document intensive and require specialized knowledge. In addition, LACERA is considering bringing some investments in-house, which would further increase these types of complexities. The investment office has been very busy during the last few years with structure reviews, adding functional asset categories, adding a portfolio analytics group that needs tools to monitor performance, benchmarks, and risk, increasing corporate governance and ESG efforts, and introducing the TIDE initiative, among others. These activities have resulted in additional legal work in the form of vendor agreements, manager hires and terminations, and policy revisions. In addition, following the bank failures in 2008 and the Swiss banking scandal, the regulatory landscape has changed too. As new regulations have been introduced to better monitor derivatives and the flow of money around the world, we have had to devote more time to compliance as well as responding to Know Your Customer, anti-money laundering, and FATCA requests. And finally, in 2016, we created a master trust for the county and court OPEB programs. That trust has grown from $561 million in 2016 to $1.9 billion in 2020 and has its own separate investments and manager relationships. In addition to the investment-related trends, I wanted to briefly note the increase in vendor agreements for non-investment divisions around LACERA. With the many IT initiatives during the past year, both as a result of the pandemic and to modernize LACERA systems in general, the legal office has seen an uptick in vendor agreement-related work. Interestingly, the number of requests for public records has decreased during the past year. We attribute this to the fact that we post all board materials online now, in addition to other frequently requested documents. Finally, this being our inaugural report, I'd like to seek your suggestions on how to make future reports a useful tool for your board in overseeing our work and carrying out your duties as trustees. And with that, I'd like to open up this presentation to any questions you may have for me.
Thank you very much for the presentation, very thorough. I do not have anybody in the chat box, but we'll open it up for trustee questions or comments on this inaugural report. I will kick things off if anyone else wants to chime in a bit. A couple of things I noticed. I thought it was very good. Just in general, these are all costs that we're tracking, but we're not billing anywhere. These just all get absorbed by the fund, correct?
Yes, yes. Do you mean whether we have internal allocation to different divisions?
Yeah, I guess just if you could explain that process a little bit. I'm just seeing that these things, we're accumulating all these charges. It's just for tracking purposes only.
Do you mean the value of the contract?
Well, I'm looking at page, the first page where it shows, the various investment projects, the transaction amounts. Are you charging staff time for the legal work per project? How does that work? I'm just trying to understand the flow.
The only time we allocate legal time is for OPEB because
Okay.
OPEB has its own separate expenses. But we don't allocate when it's for LACERA.
And then another question I had on the CPRAs, is there any value to calculating over time by using a job code or something like that, how much money, staff time we are spending responding to CPRAs, so we could track that over time?
I mean, we could certainly track it. Would you like us to report on it annually? I guess I'm just wondering what the purpose would be.
I just think it's useful if we're tracking something over time, like the number of responses. It could be that some are very complex, others are easy. It might be useful to see that there's a cost to responding to these. Just a suggestion.
That's definitely true. Okay, yeah. And the staff time would be from various divisions as well, those people gathering the documents, not just legal time. So that's very true.
Okay, thank you. I have Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Sanchez in the queue.
You're muted.
To follow up on the Public Records Act request. So I'm on the board of RELAC, Retired Employees of Los Angeles County, and I know there's a director who every month requests the retired list or the list of retirees. Why is she not instructed that she can get the list herself by just looking at the board agenda and thereby saving staff time? I felt sometimes that we've special handled some of these requests to an extent that perhaps isn't necessary.
Yes, I would say that we're working on that. I noted that we're posting a lot of things online now too, to cut down on staff time and to make it easier for people to get information. If there's any information we're not already posting that we should be, please let us know. We'd be happy to look into that.
Okay, and then just to follow up on Mr. Knox's points, the legal, we obviously have expenses related to the investment staff themselves, but the legal expenses related to closing transactions, they're tracked separately. But if we wanted to look at the total cost of investing for the agency, we would need to combine the legal costs for closing transactions with investment staff. Do we ever do that? Do we ever come up with a consolidated number for total costs related to investing?
I'm not sure. I would defer on that.
Okay, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Thank you very much. I appreciate your report. It was very thorough.
Ms. Sanchez?
Hello, Ms. Roseland. I have a question regarding the ongoing compliance. Once we've struck the contracts, there are compliance issues with, sort of natural compliance requirements that go with this, our procurement requirements that get attached to some of these contracts, et cetera. Do you also kind of track the compliance with the various contractual requirements and the cost of that compliance effort?
So I
or
knew
just
that
the time?
Yeah, we don't track time except for OPEB, like I mentioned. But as far as just doing compliance work, I mean, we have compliance work we do on the legal side when it comes to new regulations that we need to comply with, and talk to the investment office about what we need to do in order to comply. But as far as ongoing compliance, once the manager has been onboarded, I know the investment division does a thorough annual compliance with the managers themselves. So if you wanted more information than that, I would defer to them. I know it's a very thorough questionnaire and kind of question and answer period that they have with managers.
Got it. And I guess then the question is to Mr. Grable, does that include conflicts of interest, et cetera, ensuring that managers are not hiring or doing practices that we as an organization are legally required to ensure?
Good morning, Ms. Sanchez. First of all, I want to thank Christine, the legal office. They do so much. We couldn't do anything without them. So we are wholly dependent upon them. And I don't think if we were to do some type of cost accounting effort, I don't think we could put the right price on it. As it relates to compliance, and also I would say the same thing with accounting and some of the other groups that we work with, because the true cost of implementing, operating an investment program, there are a variety of groups across LACERA that are involved. So there are many people to thank. As it relates to compliance, there is an annual compliance exercise that we go through. I know that we've beefed up over time some of the conflict of interest language in contracts to assure that, to have greater certainty of that. We have, and it's in this month's CIO report, we have a compliance monitor that we attach quarterly just to flag deviations, but it's something that we're keenly focused on. Mr. Rice and team, I think we all see the world the same way, that we, as investments get more complicated, as notional dollars go up and fees go up, that we just have to stay ever more vigilant.
And one more thing, just about conflicts in general, that we also, the legal office at least, gathers all the Form 700s from the various managers.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Grable, you had wanted to comment on something else?
Thank you, Mr. Knox. I threw in my comment as part of my answer to Ms. Sanchez.
Sneaky, perfect. Thank you. Anyone else with feedback, suggestions for the future versions of this report? Okay, thank you, Ms. Roslin. Very good.
All right, thank you.
The rest of the items are B through H for information only. Under reports, I have a request from Mr. Kelly to hold item B. Were there any other items that trustees wanted to hold or speak to before we went to B?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, E, Securities Litigation Report.
Okay, perfect. And then I also had a request. I believe Mr. Kryman had to step out for a personal matter for 1 second. So I'd like to use my prerogative. Let's take item E first and then item B. Do we have Mr. Herrera, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Good morning.
Perfect. Thank you. Welcome. Mr. Santos.
Good morning, Mr. Herrera. Good to see you virtually.
Likewise, thank you.
With regards to the securities litigation program that we have, thank you for that report. My question is, as you know, the board has implemented or adopted the ENI for the fund, and I was wondering whether or not you are going to recommend that we do evaluate the different security litigation firms that we have, and with an effort to try to attract more women and African Americans and minorities to be in the panel of litigation firms that we utilize from time to time.
Thank you for the question. And actually, your question is both a good one and timely. As I mentioned in the policy, we regularly look at our pools of counsel, and this one is the same. So we do have a review of our securities litigation monitoring firms that we intend to look at. Also, we have the larger pool of approved counsel. So we will be looking at those this year. We are mindful of the program and policy that you mentioned. So we certainly will take those into consideration as we look forward and do that RFP, and we'll keep the board apprised of what the results of those RFPs are and how we took those different factors into consideration.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Santos. Moving back to item B, the procurement policy for investment-related services. Mr. Kelly, you asked to hold that item.
Thank you. Thank you. So I had asked a question at the last meeting regarding the high yield, I think it was a high yield manager search, having to do with why only one manager was presented to us. John responded with the memo. Thank you for the memo, John. And made reference to the attached procurement policy. Procurement policy, though, does state that the evaluation team is responsible for making an affirmative recommendation of the most qualified candidate managers, and the S in managers is in parentheses, to the selection authority. The selection authority in that instance was to the board. When I went back and looked at the period prior to the adoption of this policy and the period post adoption of the policy in board agendas, it appears as if this section may be interpreted to include a singular manager as opposed to the most qualified candidate managers, plural. And so I wanted to understand from your perspective, is it singular or is it plural in terms of the interpretation of this particular requirement?
Mr. Grable?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I think it varies based upon mandate. And for example, there were 2 RFPs advanced by the Equity Committee today. The first being for private equity, where that would be kind of a separate account managed by a single manager. I would interpret that as one recommendation, whereas the second recommendation was for multiple managers for up to 3. That would be multiple recommendations. So I think it's mandate specific.
Okay, and the high yield, I didn't have the documents for the high yield, so I couldn't look at the scoring differential between the candidate managers. But in my mind, if the score is not significantly different, more than one would be presented to the board.
I think it's important for staff to make an affirmative recommendation. We spend months on RFPs, and I believe our diligence is better than ever. And it will continue to get better as the times demand it. And if there is no differentiation, we would state that. If no firms are sufficient, we would state that as well. I think that we don't approach RFPs or any recommendation through kind of a cookie cutter lens. I think that we want to make the best advice possible to the board. Sometimes it may be multiple managers, sometimes it may be singular, sometimes it may be none.
Okay, my question then is, if we were to have a recommendation of more than one manager, I do think it's important in the post-COVID world that we allow managers to participate in an interview with the board through video, and not necessarily require that they come to the board in person. One of my concerns with when we last discussed this years ago with having more than one manager recommendation, or a recommendation said here, any of the 3 board would work, would be that we would require them to come to the office. And the first thing we would often say to them was, thanks for flying in from Zurich. We're running late. We don't have 20 minutes for you. We only have 10. So I think in light of that, I think it's important that if we do have managers come before the board, if a number of them are qualified to do what we want them to do, and we decide to interview them, or you present them to us for interview, that we allow that interview to be conducted through video. I think that's important that we do that. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Grable. Hearing no other questions, comments, anything in the text box regarding our reports, we're moving on to item 9, items for staff review. Linda, do we have anything?
Yes, we received 2 requests. The first item is the board requested for staff to provide a presentation at a future meeting regarding cybersecurity related to investments. And the second item was the board requested for staff to conduct a compensation and evaluation study for staff.
Okay,
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I would only comment that the first one is a duplicate request. Mr. Santos had previously requested that at a previous meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. That is noted. We are on to item 10, good of the order. Linda, would you please call on the trustees?
Absolutely. We will start off with Mr. Green.
Just to say thank you for the report today, all the work that went on behind the scenes. Thank you, John Grable, for your email letting us know that we're hitting a new high water mark of $70 billion. And I, for one, appreciate, respect, and trust our investment staff to make good decisions and trust our board to make sure we're supporting those decisions. I don't have any desire to go back to the bad old days where we're second and third guessing our investment staff. So some of the comments made today made me a little queasy, but we can address that maybe at another meeting. But I just want to end by saying very much appreciate the work that's gone into getting us to the high water mark. I got a lot of really great emails and texts congratulating LACERA, and that's because, John, the work that you and the staff have done and the work that our board has done. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Santos?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to thank the staff and Mr. Grable and Makita for the tremendous work that was done with regards to the strategic asset allocation. This is very important, and it's one area that I take very, very seriously, because that's going to be the roadmap for us for the next several years. And it's always been difficult. I mean, we have had contentious meetings regarding strategic asset allocation in the past, and I was pleased to see that we were all amicable this time, and it's great. I really appreciate that, and thank you for that. With the manager selection, I agree with Mr. Green. There's really no need to go back to the old ways. I mean, one of the things that we have implemented, and even though it's not in the policy, is that when it comes to consultants, we usually have one trustee. For example, I was appointed by the chair to be part of the evaluation team for the private equity consulting. I think that's a good practice in terms of transparency. It's always good to have one of us there. And I believe that if I see anything unusual in that those interviews or that process, I will definitely come to the board, but I don't suspect there will be any issues based on what I have seen the staff over the past, 16, 17 years that I've been on this board. So no need to go back to the old ways. We need to go forward. We are 70 billion today, so probably another, I don't know, 7-10 years, we're going to be 100 billion. So we need to operate and function like a 100 billion fund, not like we were at 25 billion years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kehoe?
I just want to commend staff for the amount of work that went into these reports, and our consultant as well. It makes it great when I can sit down and read the material and pretty much come to a decision before we have to sit down in the boardroom and discuss. and then the boardroom kind of just reaffirms the thought process. So I appreciate the hard work that goes behind the scenes to make it possible for us to come together and really come to a solid conclusion. So appreciate the hard work and looking forward to the months ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe. Ms. Greenwood?
I too want to commend staff for the amazing work that went in, the usual amazing work, but specifically in the amazing work that went into today's meeting. Other than that, it's great to see everybody, and hopefully we'll be able to meet in person again soon. Bye.
Thank you. Mr. Jones?
Yeah, just to echo what everyone else has said, as a relatively new member, it's good to see the culture around data and analytics as a way of informing smart decision-making. So I'm looking forward to the extension of the culture across other areas of strategic importance to the board as well, using data to make really smart decisions on behalf of the members. So again, congratulations to the staff and the consulting team of advisors.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Bernstein?
Thank you. Normally I would try not to repeat what other people have said, but it seems worth noting to throw in a good T.S. Eliot quote. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. When we go through something like a strategic asset allocation, and at the end, everyone is so comfortable that we barely have questions, and we practically, not legally, but effectively could have moved it on consent. That's the system really working. That's not always going to happen, but when it happens, it's terrific. And that happened today. And to everyone who had any part of that process, I tip my metaphorical hat.
Thank you, Mr. Bernstein. Mr. Kelly?
Thank you. I echo Mr. Bernstein's comments. I thought the strategic asset allocation process went really, really well. I did want to remind everyone to please be vaccinated or consider becoming vaccinated. According to the California Department of Public Health website this morning, only 49.5% of people in the state are fully vaccinated. So we still have a long way to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Ms. Sanchez?
Thank you. I echo all the comments that happened before now. And we'll remind everyone that there was a great landmark study in 2016 that showed how negative beauty contests as a way of choosing investments performs in terms of plans that empower their staff versus those that pick the winner at a 20 or 30 or 1 hour meeting. And then I will also say that tomorrow I will conclude a virtual program that I have been taking on strategic planning and scenario planning. And we have at various times discussed the need for the board to consider a strategic planning exercise. And I can tell you that I am even more, of the belief that it would be a very healthy thing for us to do as a board. And I know it's sort of on the docket for kind of more of a post-pandemic experience, but I just want to reiterate that I think that it would be a great thing for us to do. And I have gotten a tremendous amount of insight that I am very eager to share with all of my colleagues. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Mr. Kramer?
There's nothing for me.
Thank you. Ms. Fontenot?
Thank you, Linda. Nothing for me.
Mr. Popovich, I think, is on.
Nothing for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Chair Knox.
I think we have Mr. McCourt that wanted to chime in as well before I go.
Okay. Mr. McCourt?
Great. Thanks so much. Incidentally, T.S. Eliot also said April was the cruelest month. And working on all the asset allocation modeling, it was a very busy time for us and for staff. And so I want to thank all of you for your remarks about our effort. And I, in turn, will thank all the people behind the scenes that don't get to have their faces shown on this video, both at staff and Makita, that put a lot of hard work into the strategic asset allocation. So thank you for everyone's work and involvement in that. I did just want to make a quick comment. I believe you've all received a copy of Makita's press release about our forming of a joint working group to advance sustainable investing, bringing together 14 of our peers in the investment consulting industry. I highlight this to you because in no small way, our efforts in this area have been over the last several years informed and elevated by the work that your staff does in this area as well. And so I'm proud of our staff for having put this together. I'm excited that our engagement with LACERA has allowed us to take a leadership position in this area in the industry. And I look forward to lots of positive movement coming out of this working group in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Grable.
Thanks, Linda. Steve said a lot of things I was going to say, but I just want to thank the board for the feedback. It really helps motivate the team and means a lot to everyone. So thank you very much. We've got a lot of work in front of us going from an old allocation to a new one, and we realize that that we do all of this for the benefit of the members, and that we have to produce actual results, hard results, but we really appreciate the feedback. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Mr. Knox.
Thank you, Linda. Again, want to thank Mr. Grable, the rest of the investment team. Excellent work. Thank the team Makita again. I found the piece on the climate impact particularly interesting. So thank you for that. Linda emailed out an additional public comment, and I would ask that everyone review that, please. I participated in the SACRS conference last week, as I know others of you did, and wanted to mention that, again, Mr. Grable and members of his investment team did an excellent job at one of the sessions. It was a 2-hour session, I think, kicking it from one person to the next. I know Bache was part of it as well, just talking about their culture, their program, how they go about their business. They certainly represented us very well, which we always expect, but it was really good. Lastly, our unsung hero of the month, Senior Investment Analyst John Kim, for helping the budgeting team with analytical support to, I know, a LACERA-wide effort. So thank you very much for that. And with that, that closes out our public portion of the meeting. We're going to go to executive session next. I think we'll take a quick 5-minute break, be back at 11:33 to start executive session. And Linda, you can start working on getting the right people on and off the meeting.
Sounds good. Thank you.